When winter arrived in a medieval English castle and cold, damp air filtered through the thick stone walls, the kitchen was the most important and often the only truly warm place, Cunha. This heart of the castle, where life raged, culinary masterpieces were forged and the survival of hundreds of people was ensured, needed a constant and reliable source of heat. But how, in the absence of central heating and modern technology, was it possible to keep the temperature high enough to feed an entire castle and at the same time warm its inhabitants? The secrets of heating the castle kitchens were much more complex than it may seem and demonstrate an amazing ingenuity and deep understanding of the principles of thermodynamics, although without formal scientific knowledge. Get ready to learn about unconventional approaches and ingenious solutions that have allowed these colossal structures to remain functional and relatively comfortable even in the most severe frosts. We will reveal 10 amazing facts about how medieval castle kitchens fought the cold using not only available resources, but also unique architectural solutions. These facts will change your idea of the simple Middle Ages, showing that behind the apparent primitiveness, there was a real science of survival and engineering. The main source of heat in the kitchens of medieval castles was, of course, huge hearths. These colossal structures, often several meters wide, deep and high, were much more than just a place for cooking. They served as real heat centers, capable of heating significant volumes of air and even transferring heat to neighboring rooms. Unlike the small fireplaces that could be found in the private living quarters of the nobility, where the fire was lit only to create comfort or symbolic heating, kitchen hearths were designed to constantly, continuously maintain a large hot fire. Their colossal size was necessary not only to accommodate several huge boilers and skewers at the same time, capable of holding food for hundreds of people, but also to provide a sufficient mass of burning fuel to generate the colossal amount of heat so necessary to maintain the entire kitchen. Usually, such hearths were deep niches in the thickness of the wall, often with a massive arch framing the entrance, which also contributed to the accumulation of heat. Their size and construction allowed cooks to perform several culinary operations simultaneously, hanging bulky cast iron or bronze cauldrons on chains with adjustable heights directly over an open fire to prepare chowders and stews. Use massive skewers, powered by hand or even primitive mechanisms, to slowly and evenly roast whole carcasses of animals, from pigs to deer, and place embers in special niches or under large clay pots, like the predecessors of the Russian oven, for baking bread, pies, and roasting meat. But the main thing is that these hearths were built from massive stone blocks, such as granite, sandstone, or limestone, which had a unique and extremely useful feature for heating: high thermal inertia. The stone, being a dense material, slowly warmed up, absorbing heat from the constantly burning fire during many hours of active kitchen work. However, like a giant ceramic stove, it then gave off this accumulated heat for a very long time and evenly to the surrounding area of the kitchen, becoming a powerful source of radiant heat. Thus, even after the main, most intense cooking process was over and the fire began to die down, or it was deliberately left to smolder slowly until morning, the massive walls of the hearth, soaked in heat, continued to radiate residual heat for many hours, and sometimes until the very next morning. This helped to maintain a relatively comfortable temperature in the kitchen even at night, when active cooking stopped, preventing the room from being completely lined. The hearth was not just a stove for cooking food, but a giant, constantly operating heat accumulator that smoothed out sharp temperature fluctuations, provided basic heating of the room, and served as the heart of the entire thermal system of the castle kitchen. Its design took into account not only the utilitarian needs of cooking, but also the fundamental principles of heat preservation and distribution, making it a central element of everyday life and survival in the cold season. Cooks often slept in the kitchen or adjacent areas, using the residual heat of the hearth. Unlike modern kitchens, which are often designed as isolated rooms with tightly closed doors, castle kitchens, especially in large and early castles, often had an open floor plan or were connected to other rooms through wide, uninsulated archways and spacious corridors. This was not just a random architectural decision, but part of a well-thought-out, albeit intuitive system for distributing heat throughout the castle, maximizing the use of thermal energy. The hot air constantly rising from the giant hearths naturally rushed upward and spread throughout the entire kitchen. And then, thanks to these wide aisles, it could freely flow into neighboring rooms, such as storerooms for drying supplies, bakeries, servants' quarters, and in some cases, even lower halls, armories or servants' quarters located near the kitchen. This arrangement of space created a kind of heat draft, or more precisely, a system of natural convection. Warm, less dense air from the hot kitchen rose and forced out the colder, denser air from the neighboring rooms, forcing it to move towards the kitchen, and then the cooled air returned to the hearth, heated up, and the cycle repeated. This continuous airflow not only spread heat, but also promoted ventilation. Although most of the heat was, of course, lost through the huge chimneys designed to effectively remove smoke and soot, a significant part of it was retained and accumulated in the massive stone walls and ceilings of the castle, which also slowly but surely warmed up, becoming part of the heating system of the entire castle. This was an intuitive use of the fundamental principles of thermodynamics, where the very architecture of the castle promoted passive heat distribution, turning it into a single large heat exchanger. The kitchen thus served not only as a cooking center for the entire castle, but also as a central heat node from which heat was gradually but constantly distributed throughout the building. Such a system made it possible to use heat energy as efficiently as possible, not concentrating it only in one room, but distributing it throughout the entire complex. In addition, the constant movement of air caused by this convection helped to reduce the stagnation of moisture, unpleasant odors, and even helped to dry the walls in other parts of the castle, which was an important bonus in the conditions of medieval life, where dampness was a constant problem. This relationship between functionality, hygiene, and heat exchange demonstrates a complex approach to designing castle spaces, where each architectural element played a multiple role and was part of a single, well-thought-out system of survival and life support. Such thoughtfulness provided more comfortable living conditions for all the inhabitants of the castle. The castle kitchens, as well as the entire castle as a whole, were built of massive stone, the main building material of that time. Although stone feels cold and inhospitable to the touch, its extremely high density and, most importantly, its outstanding heat capacity were its main, indisputable advantage in passive heating conditions. Imagine this. During the whole day, when huge fires were burning in the kitchen, producing a huge amount of heat, and active cooking was carried out, the massive stone walls of the kitchen, reaching a thickness of several meters, absorbed and accumulated this thermal energy. This process was slow and gradual, but steady and prolonged, turning all the surrounding walls into huge natural accumulators of heat. They functioned like natural batteries, methodically absorbing excess heat. At night, when the intensity of the fire in the hearths decreased, it was supported only by embers or it completely died out. These heated stone walls began to slowly and evenly radiate the accumulated heat back into the kitchen. It was an effect perfectly analogous to the operation of modern central heating radiators or underfloor heating systems, but on a much grander, passive, and natural scale. The stone acted as a giant heat accumulator, which smoothed out sharp daily temperature fluctuations, preventing rapid lining of the room and maintaining a relatively stable and comfortable heat throughout the night. Such a system provided a base temperature that did not drop to critical values, even if marsh raged outside. Thanks to this phenomenon of thermal inertia, the working temperature in the kitchen could be maintained around the clock, albeit with some natural fluctuations. The stone mass of the walls was not just an enclosing structure that provided a fortress and protection, but an integral part of the heating system, which worked passively and without the cost of additional fuel after the initial intense heating. This property of the stone was key to maintaining the viability of the entire castle in the cold season, keeping it warm and functional even during those hours when there was no active burning in the hearths. Medieval engineers, not knowing the term heat capacity or thermal conductivity in the modern scientific sense, intuitively used its advantages, observing the behavior of materials and passing on their accumulated experience from generation to generation. Their practical knowledge allowed them to create structures that effectively coped with the harsh climate. The medieval kitchen was not just a place for cooking, but also a boiling cauldron of life, constantly filled with activity and movement. There were always a lot of people here, from the head cook, master cook, who was a key figure in the castle hierarchy, to his numerous assistants who could number in the dozens, as well as simple servants, porters, woodcutters, and sometimes soldiers or guards who ensure security and order in such an important room. All these people, actively moving, performing heavy physical work, such as chopping and carrying huge logs for the hearths, dragging tens of liters of water, constantly lighting and maintaining the fire, cleaning huge volumes of vegetables, butchering meat of large animals, constantly released a significant amount of body heat. This was a kind of biological heating, which, although it was not the main or purposeful source of heat, nevertheless made a significant and measurable contribution to the overall thermal picture of the room. In conditions of crowding and intense physical work, the effect of hundreds of human calories being dispersed in the air was noticeable and helped maintain the temperature. Moreover, in some castles, especially in earlier periods of their existence, before the development of specialized outbuildings, or in castles with a simpler and more pragmatic organization, animals could be kept quite close to the kitchen. Sometimes these were rooms for temporary keeping of animals before slaughter, or even specialized pens for young animals that require constant heat. The heat generated by animals, especially from large farm animals such as pigs, cows, or sheep that were kept for the needs of the castle, could also contribute to an increase in the overall temperature in the surrounding areas. For example, if a pigsty or cowshed was located next to a kitchen complex, then heat from the animals' bodies, as well as from the process of their vital activity, could be transmitted through common walls or air currents to the kitchen area, creating an additional, albeit indirect, heat source. This was not only an indirect, but also a very real, if not always controlled, source of heat, which supplemented the main heat from the hearths. He demonstrated how every potential unit of energy, whether from the human body or an animal, was used to survive the harsh conditions of the Middle Ages. The effect of crowding people and possibly animals in the kitchen and surrounding areas was significant, especially considering that the rooms themselves were relatively poorly insulated by modern standards, and any additional thermal energy was worth its weight in gold. The combination of these live heat sources with massive stone structures that accumulated heat created a dynamic and multi-layered thermoregulation system, where each element, even if it was not originally intended for heating, contributed to maintaining the relative comfort and functionality of the castle complex. With such active cooking, the constant use of open fires, the burning of huge volumes of wood, and the presence of numerous hearths, castle kitchens were inevitably filled with thick smoke, soot, saturated steam, strong odors of cooking food, and even potentially dangerous carbon monoxide. However, medieval builders were not naive and paid extremely great attention to creating an effective ventilation and smoke extraction system. Kitchen hearths usually had very high and wide chimneys, which, unlike simple openings for the exit of smoke, not only served as channels for the removal of combustion products, but also created a powerful natural draft, acting like the draft in a modern industrial hood. Thanks to this design and large cross-sectional area, most of the smoke, soot, and harmful combustion products were effectively drawn out of the kitchen area, preventing smoke, soot accumulation, and improving the air quality for work. In addition to the main chimneys, in the upper parts of the walls, directly under the arches of the kitchens, there could be special ventilation holes or blowouts, as well as high-placed windows that contributed to constant air circulation. These openings could have been fitted with primitive flaps or shutters to adjust the airflow. Properly designed ventilation not only provided fresh air and effectively reduced smoke, which was critical for the health and efficiency of personnel, but also allowed flexible control of the indoor temperature. In cold weather, draft could be partially reduced by using these flaps or adjusting the size of the openings to keep more precious melt inside the kitchen. On the contrary, in extreme heat, high humidity, or excessive smoke, the draft increased for more intensive air exchange, quickly removing excess heat and steam, It was a subtle but vital game with air currents. On the one hand, it was necessary to quickly and safely remove dangerous and unpleasant combustion products. On the other, to prevent excessive heat loss, which could lead to the cooling of the room. The skill of medieval engineers and builders lay precisely in this ability to balance these seemingly opposite tasks. They created a complex system that effectively controlled the microclimate in the kitchen, preventing both overheating and excessive heat loss. Thus, the chimney and vents were not just functional elements for removing smoke, but part of a complex climate system carefully optimized for the complex and demanding conditions of a medieval castle kitchen. Their design was the result of centuries of practical experience and observations of the behavior of fire and air. Medieval kitchens were literally filled with massive metal utensils, and utensils that played a much larger role than just containers for cooking. Here you could find huge cast iron cauldrons of various sizes, ranging from small ones for personalis to gigantic ones that could hold food for hundreds of people. Heavy iron pans, long wrought iron skewers for roasting meat over an open fire, numerous clay pots and pitchers, often reinforced with metal rims for strength, as well as many other metal tools. Devices for cooking. Metal, especially cast iron, from which boilers and pans were most often made, has an exceptionally high thermal conductivity and significant heat capacity. This means that it heats up quickly and is able to retain heat for a long time. When these massive objects were heated over an open fire or on smoldering coals in the hearths, they not only prepared food efficiently, but also accumulated a huge amount of thermal energy, which then gradually and evenly radiated into the surrounding area of the kitchen. Heated to high temperatures, metal dishes placed on the floor, on massive stone tables, on special coasters for cooling, or simply stacked against the walls after use, acted as many small but very effective sources of additional heat. These objects, like portable radiators, continued to actively transfer heat to the room long after they were removed from the fire. For example, a large cast iron cauldron that had just been prepared for the entire castle garrison could remain noticeably warm for hours, continuing to radiate heat and helping to maintain the overall temperature in the room, especially during those hours when the intensity of the fire in the hearths decreased. This was a kind of inventory heating, where each item used for cooking indirectly, but very significantly, contributed to the heating of the room, making the kitchen even warmer and more functional. The cumulative effect of the many heated metal objects that were constantly being used, heated, and moved around the kitchen was significant. Thus, even everyday kitchen utensils played a double role. They were an integral tool for cooking and at the same time a passive element of the heating system. This emphasizes the pragmatism and waste-free nature of medieval life, where every detail, every material had its own practical value and was used to the maximum for several tasks, contributing to the overall survival and comfort in the conditions of castle life. The process of burning wood in huge kitchen hearths left behind a huge amount of hot ash and embers. Instead of simply throwing away this waste of burning, medieval cooks and servants found many secondary uses for maintaining and distributing heat, demonstrating amazing resource savings. This was not just utilization, but a purposeful strategy to maximize each unit of energy produced. Hot ash, being an excellent insulator and heat accumulator, could be used to heat stone benches, seats, or even floors in certain areas of the kitchen where staff could rest or do less active work. For example, it could be poured under thick stone slabs to create a kind of warm floor or hot surface that retains heat for a long time. This made it possible to significantly increase comfort in conditions where there was no central heating as such. Imagine the cold stone kitchen of a castle in winter. Any opportunity to create a local heat source was worth its weight in gold. The ash, slowly cooling down, gave off heat for many hours, which made it an ideal energy storage device. Moreover, the ash was often used to maintain an optimal temperature during fermentation or to slow down some dishes. For example, pots of stewed meat or porridge could be buried in hot ashes, which ensured uniform and long-term cooking at a low, stable temperature, preventing burning and preserving all the taste qualities of products. It was a kind of slow cooking of the Middle Ages using residual heat. Sometimes the ash was mixed with water to produce lye, which in turn was used for washing and cleaning, as well as for making soap. Thus, even the chemical potential of ash was put to use, demonstrating a deep understanding of the properties of materials. The embers, in turn, were especially valuable. They were often moved from the main hearth to smaller portable braziers, braziers, or clay pots with lids, which were then placed in those parts of the kitchen where local heat was needed. These mobile heat sources could be used to keep food hot before serving, which was critical for the quality of dishes, especially in large castles, where the path from the kitchen to the dining room could be quite long. In addition, charcoal roasters were used to dry wet clothes or to heat the hands and feet of cooks working in cool areas. In harsh winter conditions, when the temperature in the castle could drop very low, such personal heat sources were vital for maintaining the efficiency and health of the staff. Moreover, these charcoal braziers could be moved to nearby, less heated areas of the castle, such as storerooms, servants, quarters, or even the private chambers of a lord if necessary, to provide temporary local heating. This made it possible to create comfortable conditions in any part of the castle as needed, without the need to maintain a fire in each room constantly. In the bedrooms, for example, braziers were used to preheat the beds before going to bed. For medicinal purposes, the heat from the coals could be used to warm the limbs or to prepare herbal infusions. This versatility in the use of coals shows how flexible the medieval heat management system was. These mobile batteries were a symbol of adaptability and ingenuity, allowing the distribution of heat energy throughout the castle to meet changing needs. This was an extremely efficient way to maximize the use of every bit of fuel, extracting maximum thermal energy from it and demonstrating an extremely lean attitude to resources. Thus, even what is considered waste today, in the Middle Ages was a valuable resource for maintaining comfort and functionality in the castle environment. The effectiveness of this approach was due not only to the lack of fuel, but also to a deep empirical knowledge of the properties of materials. The use of ash and coals not only warmed, but also maintained sanitary conditions, since ash has absorbent properties and could be used to eliminate odors. This highlights the pragmatism and ingenuity inherent in medieval societies, which could not afford the luxury of extravagance, but rather sought to make the most of every available resource. This was a real example of a cyclical economy long before the term was introduced. Castle kitchens were often located in close proximity to other rooms, which also generated a significant amount of heat in the course of their activities. First of all, these were bakeries, which were usually located either right next to the kitchen or were integrated into its complex. This arrangement was not accidental, but was the result of carefully thought-out architectural and functional planning. Huge stone ovens for baking in bread, pies, and other baked goods required long and intense heating to very high temperatures. The process of kindling such furnaces could take many hours, and after reaching the desired temperature, they retained heat for a long time, slowly cooling down. When these stoves were heated and operated at full capacity, they radiated a colossal amount of heat, which inevitably penetrated into the rooms adjacent to the kitchen through the common walls and doorways. Thus, the kitchen received a powerful additional heat source from the neighboring bakery, creating a kind of heat cluster or synergistic effect. This significantly reduced the heat load on the main kitchen hearths, as part of the necessary heat came from outside. The bakery's operation not only provided the castle with fresh bread, which is the basis of the diet, but also helped to heat the kitchen space, reducing the overall load on the main kitchen hearths and saving valuable fuel. In the context of a middle-century castle, where logistics and supply were complex tasks, any savings in resources made a huge difference. This demonstrated a deep understanding of the principles of heat transfer and energy efficiency long before the relevant scientific laws were formulated. Sometimes other warm production facilities, such as breweries where the fermentation process took place, could also be located nearby. Fermentation itself is an exothermic reaction that generates heat, and the brewing process as a whole required maintaining a certain temperature of water and wort. The neighborhood of the brewery could provide additional, though less intense, heat supply. It could also be special storerooms for storing food, which needed to maintain a certain, not too low temperature to prevent spoilage, especially in winter. For example, some vegetables, fruits, or even meat required moderately cool but not freezing conditions for long-term storage. The heat from the bakery and kitchen helped keep the pantry stable above freezing. This was not an accidental, but a well-thought-out architectural solution that allows you to synergistically use heat from various production processes for general heating, reducing the need for additional fuel and enhancing the effect of the main hearths. Such an organization of the space optimized the heat flow inside the castle, demonstrating a deep understanding of energy efficiency long before the term was introduced. It also minimized the movement of hot products and raw materials, which increased safety and efficiency. In the absence of centralized heating systems, such local heating centers were the only way to maintain functionality and comfort. The location of various hot functions next to each other was key to creating a self-sufficient and warm system during the colder months, providing not only comfort for the staff, but also optimal conditions for cooking and storing food, which was vital for the survival of the castle's inhabitants. This was an example of an integrated design approach that takes into account many interrelated factors. Despite the fact that castles are mostly associated with massive stone structures, thick wooden beams and ceilings were actively used in many kitchens and adjacent rooms, derivani balki I perikrycia. This may seem paradoxical given the risk of fire, but the tree was chosen deliberately due to its unique thermal insulation properties. Wood, unlike stone, is a much better heat insulator. It conducts heat much more slowly, which means that the heat that rose from hot fires lingered longer in the lower layers of the room and did not go up so quickly through the ceiling or into the upper floors. This principle of thermodynamics was intuitively understood by medieval builders. Thick wooden floors and massive beams supporting them helped create a kind of heat dome or heat trap over the kitchen's work area. This design effectively prevented the rapid rise and dispersion of hot air. The high ceilings, characteristic of many castle kitchens, combined with wooden floors, created an air cushion that further improved the insulation. In addition, various natural insulation materials such as straw, clay, moss, or even dry leaves and branches could be clogged into the cracks between the beams and directly into the thickness of the floors. These materials, rich in air pockets, further increased the thermal insulation properties of the ceiling and reduced heat loss to the upper floors, to the attic, or to unused spaces above the kitchen. The use of these affordable and cheap materials demonstrates the pragmatism and resourcefulness of medieval builders. It was a simple yet extremely effective solution, using the natural properties of available materials to retain precious heat where it was most needed. The combination of heat-intensive stone walls that slowly warmed up and took a long time to remove heat, and insulating wooden floors that prevented it from quickly moving up, created a balanced system that helped maintain a stable temperature for a long time. The stone walls acted as heat accumulators, and the wooden ceilings acted as a heat-retaining barrier. The wood also absorbed excess moisture from the air, which helped create a more comfortable microclimate in the kitchen, despite the constant use of water and steam. Humidity generated by boiling water and cooking food could be a problem, but the wood helped regulate it, preventing condensation and mold from forming. In addition to thermal insulation, wooden beams also served a structural function, supporting the overlying floors and ensuring the overall strength of the structure. Their massiveness and density contributed to sound insulation, which was important in the busy space of kitchens. The aesthetic component also played a role. Exposed wooden beams gave the interior of the kitchen a special character and served as a reminder of the skill of medieval artisans. Thus, wooden floors were a multifunctional element, contributing not only to the preservation of heat, but also to the overall functionality and comfort of the castle space. This highlights an integrated approach to construction, where each element performed multiple tasks. The chimneys of the castle kitchens were not just vertical channels for the removal of smoke and combustion products. They were massive stone shafts that ran through the thickness of the castle walls, rising high above the roof. It was a complex engineering structure that required considerable labor and materials. During the operation of the fireplace, smoke and very hot air, rising up these wide and high chimneys, transferred a significant part of their heat to the stone walls of the chimney itself. These walls, sometimes several feet thick, acted as giant heat storage tanks. These heated multi-ton stone walls of the chimney, in turn, radiated stored heat to the surrounding rooms through which the shaft passed. It was a kind of hidden heating or passive heat exchanger, where the chimney, being the main functional part of the exhaust system, also served as an invisible radiator. It radiated heat to adjacent corridors, storerooms, service rooms, or even some of the living quarters located along its path. Often, the higher the chimney rose, the more rooms it could transfer residual heat, becoming a kind of vertical heating system. This was especially valuable in rooms that did not have their own hearths, but needed minimal heating for comfort or preservation of property. Thus, even the heat that was intended to be thrown out with smoke was partially used to heat the castle premises, significantly increasing the overall energy efficiency of the castle. This demonstrates the remarkable pragmatism and engineering savvy of medieval architecture, where each element performed multiple functions, maximizing the usefulness of resources. Chimneys, in addition to their main task of purifying the air from smoke and soot, were an integral part of the castle's heat system, helping to smooth out temperature changes and maintain a relatively warm climate in massive stone buildings, especially in cold weather. This was especially important, given that the castle walls made of stone were very good at keeping the cold out. Designing chimneys required deep knowledge in the field of aerodynamics and thermal engineering, based on centuries of experience. The size, shape, and location of the chimneys have been optimized to ensure efficient draft and maximum heat output. Sometimes, special ledges or extensions were created inside the flue channels to increase the surface area of contact of hot smoke with the stone and accordingly increase heat exchange. In addition, the location of the chimneys was often designed so that they passed through the central, most used parts of the castle, providing heat exactly where it was most needed. This not only improved comfort, but also helped prevent the walls from getting wet and mold forming in massive stone structures, which was a constant problem in medieval buildings. Overall, the chimneys were not just part of the ventilation system, but an integrated component of the castle's complex and efficient heat management system. As we can see, heating kitchens in medieval English castles was not just a matter of lighting a fire, but a complex and multifaceted system based on an intuitive understanding of physical principles and a masterful use of available materials. Giant hearths that function as heat accumulators, massive stone walls that absorb and radiate heat, an elaborate ventilation system that regulates airflow, the use of heat from neighboring industrial premises, and even human heat. All this worked in the complex, turning the kitchen into a real thermal center of the castle, maintaining its viability. These 10 facts only lift the veil over the amazing ingenuity of the people of the Middle Ages, who were able to create functional and relatively comfortable living conditions, even in the harshest conditions without modern technologies. Their approaches have been deeply integrated into architecture and everyday life, demonstrating remarkable adaptability and efficiency. They were masters of survival and engineers of their time, skillfully using every resource. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and want to learn even more unusual facts about life in the Middle Ages, subscribe to our channel. We will continue to reveal the secrets of the past for you and show you how inventive our ancestors were.